You can see we've made a technology change for this episode, and I'd like to welcome Brandon Moore from our Ohio office. Brandon leads our pre-construction services team in Ohio and focuses an awful lot right now on the industrial and warehouse distribution market that we're going to focus on a little bit today. Thanks for joining us, Brandon, and welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Happy to be part of the conversation.
Brandon, in many of our earlier conversations, we've talked about some of the materials that have been impacted most in this current market, and also that they have an impact that differs from market to market. And as we're talking now specifically about the industrial or warehouse and distribution market, can you highlight what a couple of those materials are and the impact that they have had on these projects?
Yeah, certainly. Focusing on that industrial warehouse, obviously there's going to be, concrete's going to be a big component of that, as well as roofing, and then obviously steel. And then when you look at these warehouses, just the sheer size and volume of them, we've seen some as big as 1 million, 1.2 million square feet. So when you start to get into buildings that size, material does play a big impact on those.
We know that across our different offices, we do work in many of the same markets, yet there are nuances between our offices and geographic locations. How has the ability to get material impacted your projects?
Quite a bit. Looking at some of those components we just mentioned, steel, we're looking at a 9 to 10 month lead time. Precast walls, those are pretty much out until calendar year 2023. And roofing's been the most difficult to try to procure, just with the uncertainty of that. And right now, with an order placed, you're looking at probably closer to end of the year before that would be delivered. And
I think actually we are seeing almost exactly the same kind of answers here when we pose those questions. Specific to roofing, one of the things that has come up here recently from our roofing contractors is being placed on allocation from their vendors and suppliers. Are you seeing that there as well?
Yeah, we're starting to hear rumors of the same thing. Some of our trade partners that we use are starting to talk about that. They're doing everything they can to try to procure material and get that secured for us, but it's just been challenging.
So Brandon, as you talked about some of those long lead items today, how has that impacted the overall schedule of a project? For example, how long does it take you, once you get the go-ahead to get in the ground, or then once you're in the ground, how long to complete a project?
Looking at, say, an average size, say a 500,000 square foot warehouse or so, you typically have somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 months worth of design. And then you've probably got about a month or so permit approvals. But once we hit that, we're able to move on site and start construction out in the field. The steel impact, the roofing impact, some of those lead items, I wouldn't say have extended that overall schedule, say pre-pandemic, but it has changed the way that we've procured that, meaning that we've had to have some of those conversations and procuring some of that material earlier in the design process. With those lead times with steel, you're going to need that before you wait till the end of design. So we've been doing a lot of indemnification proposals, which really allows us to procure that material, those long lead item materials during design, and get those locked in. That way we can hopefully keep our schedule as close as possible.
I know you've also looked at a couple of other strategies across different subcontractors or different materials, in addition to just a procurement strategy. Can you share a couple of those with us?
Yeah, really, Central Ohio has been a big precast market, and with those lead times extending out, into 2023, we've been seeing a lot more site cast tilt. That's really been able to help in areas where we can get steel in time and really allow that as an alternative to what we would historically do precast here in this market.
And we've seen the same here to a more limited degree. I think you're far enough south that your warm weather climate is probably a month or so longer than ours, and that may make it easier to fit within that window. Another thing that I know we have seen here on a couple of projects is that traditional bar joist roof structure going to more conventional framing members. Have you seen that there as well?
We have, not as much due to cost, but yeah, the joist and deck is what's driving those long lead items. If the opportunity is right, we look at doing a more beam frame system. We've explored that. Actually, we're doing one right now with that system.
When it comes to the cost of these warehouse distribution buildings, they are made up of a relatively smaller number of trades than many of our other projects. Have you seen any relief yet in any of those prices, or are they still on an upward trajectory?
Yeah, they're still heading upward. I don't think we've seen anything come down looking at an overall cost per square foot. Steel was one that started early in 2020 that really started to drive up. We were hovering around $5 a square foot for steel, and we've seen that steadily climb up to, we've hit up to $17, $18 a square foot. Good news is we have seen that somewhat level off the last few months, and really that's been around the 1650 to 17, somewhere in that range for steel nowadays.
You know that one of the things that we're tracking behind the scenes is some of the commodity pricing that is related or connected. And as you mentioned back in 2020, when the price of steel started to go up, the commodity price of steel started to go up as well. And I think peaked at somewhere 3 times or more what it was before the pandemic started. Now, on the commodity side, we have started to see that come down a little bit in the last couple of months. And it just makes me wonder, if we won't start to see our pricing come down, or if it's still so demand and schedule heavy that they're likely to stay elevated even if flat.
The conversations I'm having, it doesn't sound like anything's ever going to go back to that where it was, that $5 a square foot. I think people are hopeful that it might start to trend down a little bit. That demand right now is so high for this product that everyone that I've been talking to from our suppliers are saying that things are probably going to hold through this year, and are hopeful maybe in 23 we'll see some of that relief.
In addition to steel, we've touched on things like roofing and precast. Can you drill a little bit deeper into some of those materials and talk to us about what you've been seeing and hearing?
Yeah, roofing right now has really been the hot topic. Just trying to get procurement. We're being told lead times for that are towards the end of the year, but no one's really guaranteeing that. They're telling us the best of their knowledge they're shooting for November, December delivery, but no manufacturer is guaranteeing that right now. And the other piece of that too that makes budgeting difficult or estimating on the front end is looking at those materials, because they're not guaranteeing them. They're giving us guidance pricing, which is where they think the price will be at the time of delivery. The best example I can give is probably like buying lobster, where it's buying it at market price. You're at the mercy of what that material pricing is at the time it ships. Now, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to buy that until end of the year, so we're at the mercy of what happens with pricing between now and then. What I'm really seeing, what I'm hearing too from our suppliers is that, what they're telling us is that pricing is going to continue to go up throughout the year. I've had numerous suppliers of ours mention to us that they're looking to expect probably a 15 to 20% material increase quarter over quarter through the end of this year.
Yeah, that's incredible on top of what we've already seen. And did they tell you, is it simply supply and demand that's driving that there's just not enough supply to meet the demand, and so that's forcing prices up?
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's what they're telling us, is that they're just they got so much backlog worth of orders to fill that they're just that far behind.
Yeah. Is most of that material domestically manufactured, or is any of it?
Most of that's manufactured here locally. There's different plants throughout the U.S. that manufacture that, where they get that from.
I know back in my self-perform days when we were doing our own concrete work, the option of doing the site cast tilt up came up a couple of times, and we did it on a couple of projects. Like I mentioned before, though, here in Northern Illinois, the two things working against us are both climate and the short time frame that we have from spring to fall to do that work, as well as our cost of labor being in a union labor market. We've never been able to compete with the precast contractors for plant cast material. Is that similar or different from what you have in Ohio?
Yeah, historically, looking pre-pandemic, we used to be able to buy precast concrete around the $17 to $18 per square foot of panel. Comparing that to site cast tilt, just the panel itself, we're looking at somewhere in the $14 to $16 a square foot range. Now, keep in mind, to meet energy code, we've also got to do stick pin insulation, which adds about $4 or so a square foot on that, as well as some other steel embeds and column cans and things like that. So when you start looking apples to apples, historically, precast has always been the more cost-effective option. Now, talking to some of these precasters, looking at where they're at on their lead times, they're telling us plan on probably around 24 to 25 a square foot of panel, which when you start looking at tilt, it really makes that more comparable and more cost effective to go that route.
So when you mentioned the apples to apples comparison from the insulated sandwich panel from precast versus a solid panel out of cast in place concrete that then you have to insulate on the inside, have you or your contractors there looked at any of the insulated tilt up panels?
Yeah, we've looked at it a couple different ways. The thermomass system, which is just a different way of site cast, where you pour your first layer of concrete, then you set your insulation, you pour a topping layer, and then tilt that up in place. There's also an alternative product out there called tips that our Indianapolis group's actually doing a project right now in Indiana. We've looked into it over in Ohio, but haven't had a chance to use that system yet.
Are there cost and schedule differences between those two options?
Yeah, doing your tilt panels with the sandwich from a cost perspective does add a little bit more compared to the solid concrete panel with the insulation on the inside. Historically, we've seen probably a few dollars a square foot in comparison. But with that, you don't need to do the insulation on the inside, which some developers like just due to the maintenance of that. We've really seen them go with that insulated panel, but it really comes down to preference.
So if we drilled into the math on that for just a second, so take one of those 500,000 square foot warehouses, how many square feet of precast would be on a typical enclosure for that building?
For that, you're probably looking somewhere in the 170,000 to 190,000 square foot of panel versus on a 500,000 square foot building.
Okay, so using my simple math, I'm going to round up to an even 200,000. And if that is $2 a square foot, say difference in premium is 400,000. So it's less than $1 a square foot difference over the cost of the building. So as you said, it more comes down to preference than truly a cost driver.
Right.
This has really been a lot of great information, Brandon. And as we wind down, just a couple of more quick questions. Do you expect any of this to change in 2022?
No, everything we're seeing is indicating this trend to continue. Really, the demand is there. Looking at articles we're reading and hearing that Columbus is at an all-time low of vacancy rate. I've seen numbers at the end of calendar year last year of 21 down around 2.1%.
I think that says a lot right there in that one statement of just how little vacant space there is in your part of the country and why that's driving so much of this booming market. So where do you think we go from here? What kind of things do we do leveraging our relationships with both customers and subcontractors?
Yeah, no, looking with owners, it really comes down to communication, just being transparent with them, letting them know what we're hearing and what's going on, and just being that partner and being truthful and honest with them. And obviously leveraging our relationships with our trade partners and being able to provide the best service we can to our clients and working with those folks to the best of our ability.
I'd just like to say thanks for all the great information and for joining me today. Hope we can do it again sometime soon. Thanks again.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Scott.